Afternoon and good evening, wherever you happen to be in the world. It looks like we've got a great crowd today, and certainly appreciate you taking some time out of your day to join us for our presentation on the Incumbent Vendor Health Check. I would imagine many of you are on here wondering how healthy is your particular digital technology vendor, and our company founder, Tony Byrne, will be on the line with us shortly to walk through 10 telltale signs that your vendor could be in some trouble and you may want to look elsewhere. We've seen so much volatility in the marketplace over the past several months between HP acquiring OpenText acquiring HP's assets, Dell and EMC merging, and even this week seeing Jive be acquired by a private equity firm. So, these are the things that we tell our subscribers to stay on the lookout for as you're making investments in these different digital technology solutions. If you're new to Real Story Group, certainly welcome. We appreciate you being on here with us today. What the approach that we take with our subscribers and customers is that we are here to help you to not only select but remain effective with the digital technology solution that's going to be the right fit for your particular needs. We don't believe in any sort of best or magic vendors, but rather what is the product that is going to do what it is that you need it to do. And so to that end, we've developed tools to help you generate customized shortlists based on your particular use cases, criteria, and strategic considerations. You can do side-by-side comparisons of the vendors to see where they do well, and maybe more importantly, where they fall short. And then if you're not really in technology selection mode, we also have a product called Real Score that allows you to measure your people, your processes, and your systems, see how well you're doing thus far, and then benchmark yourselves against your industry peers. You may think you're behind, or you may think you're ahead, and this will give you a clear understanding of where you're at and then a strategic roadmap moving forward. What's different about Real Story Group versus some other analyst firms that you may have come across in the past is that we are completely independent in that we don't have any sort of a pay for play type of model within our research. We don't advise the vendors on their strategy, nor do we accept any money from them for any sort of special treatments. We're just here to serve the technology users and buyers to make sure that you're using the solution that's the best fit for your needs. A couple of housekeeping items of note before we get started here. For all attendees on today's call, we'll be sending these slides over to you within the next day or two. And then also for our subscribers, you'll be able to access a recorded version of this in your subscriber library by the end of the week. Also, if you have questions, please enter those into the questions tab here in the GoToMeeting control panel, and we'll get to those either during the presentation or at the very end. And with that, let me turn things over to Tony.
Great, thanks, Scott. This is always a topic kind of near and dear to my heart, the 20 years or so that I've been doing this, watching customers sometimes have very successful relationships with key vendors and other times really struggling. So I'm going to give away the end here and talk about these 10 potential symptoms of a failing vendor or product or technology, including an open source project. We're going to go through each one of these 10, so you're going to get a chance to then also do kind of a poll and do a little bit of a checklist yourself. We're going to do kind of like a little Cosmo quiz thing here towards the end. So this will be very interactive. But we're going to look at this in the context of these 10. But what I want you to do is to think about, everyone on the line here, think about a particular vendor that you may have a concern about, or an incumbent vendor or supplier technology to your enterprise. You maybe have a little bit of a spidey sense about, a tingling that maybe all is not well, or maybe even more than just a tingle that all is not well, and you're concerned about the health. And then we'll come back towards the end, give you a chance to actually run your own checklist. So before we get into these 10, I think the first thing is to point out that, failure can happen, to almost any sort of vendor, right? There's a lot of vendors who will say, well, we're immune to this. One thing is, well, our package is open source, so it never goes out of business. We know that's not true. We know that there's many platforms like Zope and Zope CMS and Midgard open source that really did kind of kind of die off. So open source is no guarantee. Or that, our appliance is a black box, is just going to keep on running for you in perpetuity. That, of course, we know is not true. Just talk to people who are using Google Search Appliance. Or this other one that you'll hear is, our company is too big to fail. And, that actually may technically be true, that IBM, Microsoft, Google, they're not going away. But big companies sometimes make very rapid decisions to get out of particular technology segments, to eliminate and sunset different products. Microsoft has done this with several WCM tools. Google has done this with WCM. So has SAP. I mean, big vendors sometimes, can afford to just kill products, and they do. And here's the other one too that we often hear is, as a cloud-based supplier, we have to win your business every month. That's typically not true. Typically, you're paying them 12 months in advance for one thing, but also the switching costs in the cloud are sometimes even higher than they are on-prem. And so there is quite a bit of lock-in in the cloud. And we have seen from time to time cloud-based suppliers, either the vendor goes under or the product gets killed. And so there is some risk there. So cloud doesn't necessarily save you here. So the point isn't that, you should live in constant fear of a vendor, either the technology dead ending or the vendor going in a different direction, but it does happen. It does happen. And so what my wish for you is to be able to look at these telltale warning signs and be forewarned, because forewarned is forearmed. Okay, let's look at 10 things. This is a kind of rough order of priority of things that can signal a particularly unhealthy situation. So the first one is significant fall off in new customers. The key thing here is new customers. We call this sort of the quiet disease, because oftentimes the impact isn't necessarily felt right away. The vendor's still chugging along. It's getting a lot of maintenance revenue, which is from its existing customer base, but quietly underneath, there's a kind of a hollowing out of the customer base. And over time, this can be indicative of a technology that's just not going to carry forward. The other big one that I put right up there with new customers is declining community events or no community events at all. So this tool's been out in the marketplace, but people aren't meeting around it. Now, to be sure, maybe there's vibrant online forums. Those are useful. But in our experience, when people actually make the effort and takes the effort, when customers in particular take the effort to get up and meet each other, either annually or semi-annually across different continents, or maybe it's a monthly meetup group locally in your area, that this is a sign of very healthy technology. Even if the vendor is struggling, it's a sign that the technology itself is likely to endure. In fact, we think it's probably the biggest predictor of technology longevity is the overall ecosystem around it. And community events is one marker of the health, a key marker of the health of that community ecosystem. Of course, the ecosystem extends well beyond this. These are some of the things that we when we evaluate tools and vendors. We look at these different dimensions in terms of partnerships, things the vendor's doing itself, customer extranets, customer communities, service partners. The more vibrant the ecosystem, the more likely that the technology is going to persist, whatever problems it may be experiencing in the marketplace or whatever difficulties that the vendor or the open source community is going through. So for example, you have even open source project like Joomla, which has been really struggling from a governance standpoint over the past several years, but the community around it is really strong. It's been able to persist and even succeed at some level. Third one is disrupted product support. Now this one's interesting because most customers, when they talk to us about product support from their vendor, it pretty much runs the gamut from bad to really bad to completely awful. So it's really, usually you're talking about just how not bad is a product support. But this is often an area where some of the first cuts are made. So if you run into disrupted product support, that can be an indication that the vendor itself may be seriously struggling. Fourth one that Scott kind of hinted at was this whole notion of serial acquisition. So you have, products that like Interwoven and Media Bin and others that started at Interwoven, went to Autonomy, then to HP, then to OpenText. We saw a similar thing, with some WCM tools as well. So, and now there's an open issue. Jive, as you know, was just acquired yesterday. It was the first acquisition for Jive, so it's the first time it was acquired. It was acquired by some private equity folks. And so that's potentially a little bit of a warning because they will sometimes shed different things as well. So, if Jive ends up on its third owner, then clearly that's a case for some concern that there's some underlying problem either with the business model or the technology. So a single acquisition, you can kind of wait and see, and you can go on our blog and see what we think of the Jive acquisition. But when a technology or a company gets acquired a third time, maybe a fourth time, then you know something is deeply wrong underneath. And the other big issue that we've seen over the years as a real marker of poor health is rapid vendor staff turnover. So to be sure, people will come and go from jobs, and sometimes rapid turnover indicates a very fast-growing vendor. So it can sometimes be a sign of at least of some financial health. But usually when people come and then they go within 3 months, it's often a sign that, well, something is symptomatic of a management problem or a business model shortcoming, that they're not able to keep even their most talented hires for long enough. And that's a sign that there's some deeper sclerosis going on. Okay, so at the beginning, suggested that you think about a particular vendor. So we're halfway through the 5, and I'm going to push here the first poll. And what I want you to do is think about that vendor, and then this is a multiple choice thing, so you can answer one for each one, and just select any of these 5 that we've talked about. How many of you are actually experiencing any of these with any vendor? So again, you can click more than one, and you can go through here and just click off any of these 5. Then we'll do this for the next 5 too, but this gives you a chance to start talking about what are some of the problems that you've been experiencing. So I'm going to give you a little bit more time to answer this, and see how many of you actually find these sort of symptoms. Okay. All right, so why don't we go ahead? I'm going to go ahead, once you finish this here, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll, and then we'll share the results here. So it's interesting, kind of across the board, not declining community events, so that's probably a good sign, but definitely, some of the other things that seem pretty common here: rapid vendor turnover, serial acquisitions, fall off in new customers. Those are significant, particularly that first one, fall off in new customers, because again, that's a sign of potentially a more long-term sort of problem. So, all right, great. So we'll go ahead and then talk about some of the other symptoms, 6 through 10 here. So this one we don't see too much anymore, though it's happened in the past. We've seen this with a couple of WCM products like Canonic, and we call it escape to open source. And so this was a commercial product where it kind of ran out its life as a commercial offering, and the vendor says, well, maybe if I just sort of throw this open to the community and I can just get support off this, which is the most lucrative part anyway, maybe I can basically get the community to do the new revs on this technology. More commonly, we see it the other way around, that we see open source communities becoming increasingly more commercialized, so it's often more the opposite. But open source has always been primarily about free as in free speech. To some extent, free as in free beer, which is good, but not always the case. But there's another dimension to this, which is free as puppies, which is basically giving something away. And that's when the vendor says, we don't really have the resources to support this anymore. We want someone else to raise all of these dogs. And I say that quite literally. This is obviously a concern. Doesn't happen too often, but when it does, it's a concern. The 7th one is significant as well. It's slower product updates. So it's natural over time that the release cadence of these sorts of tools are going to slow a little bit. Part of it is you often have an incumbent base that you have to support, even if it's a cloud or software as a service offering. You still have a large incumbent base. You have to do regression testing. You've got to make sure it's still working for your customer base. So you often, as a product matures and ages, it's naturally going to be slower. But having said that, there's slow and then there's really slow, right? So if you're seeing that the duration in between releases is starting to elongate, or the value, oftentimes what we'll see actually is that the vendor may follow the same cadence, but they're doing less and less in each release. And so it becomes, the cycle of innovation becomes slower and slower. This is another form of cost cutting. What often leads to is technical debt. And then when the technical debt gets too big, it becomes insurmountable. And then that's particularly dangerous, because at that point, then it's quite possible that no one really wants the technology anymore. They may want, some other vendor might buy the maintenance contracts, but they don't really want the technology. So, open text and CA and some other firms are famous for buying aging technology that wasn't updated, has a lot of technical debt, and just kind of milking them for their software, for their maintenance revenue streams. So slow product updates. Next one is evasive account reps. So account reps are by their nature optimists. They should be. And in an ideal world, they're being very candid with you about what's going on. When they start becoming evasive about what's going on in the future, it could be that it's because they themselves don't know. And if they don't know, then obviously that's a serious concern. But other times it could be that there are what we might call not errors of commission, in other words, not outright dissembling, but errors of omission, where they're just not telling you necessarily the whole truth, and you're not necessarily getting the real story out of them. And very often we find then people going out into the community, hopefully there's a vibrant community, and that's where you're getting the real answers, not from the account rep. The ninth symptom we see pretty commonly among kind of struggling technologies. It's meandering roadmaps. So it's a roadmap that goes in one direction for 6 months, then maybe in a different direction. Doesn't seem to be a steady hand at the tiller. Things get delayed. It's usually a sign of some strategic drift within the organization, or an inability to focus on particular categories of their most important customers. And so on the one hand, of course, you want any roadmap to be adaptive these days, and so vendors should be allowed to make changes and adapt those roadmaps to the reality and the opportunities that are in front of them. But when it shows a lack of focus over a period of years, oftentimes that's suggestive of, again, a kind of a strategic drift, and this can be signs of a deeper malady, within the particular enterprise, within the vendor. Then the 10th one we see, and particularly in very entrepreneurial organizations, is distracted founders who are often chasing the next big thing. Now, Elon Musk can kind of get away with this, although as a customer of SolarCity, I would suggest that he maybe spends a little bit more time sticking to that knitting before he goes off to SpaceX, but that's just a personal anecdote here. But not everyone is Elon Musk, right? And we often find that founders, particularly entrepreneurial founders, sometimes their attention wanders. They often go off onto other things. We saw this with Hannon Hill, where very promising WCM, the founders got all interested in email marketing, formed Pardot, and then took off to the races with that particular tool. They were very successful with Pardot, but in the meantime, Hannon Hill kind of stalled in the marketplace. So sometimes you'll see, the senior leadership sort of looking for the next big thing, and that's a sign that they think that the existing technology has plateaued, right? Which doesn't mean they're giving up on it, because it could be a source of revenue to fund their next adventure, but it's a sign that they think that the existing opportunities have plateaued, and obviously that's not a good thing for you. Okay. So now we're going to do the same thing again and see, to what extent are you all experiencing these second 5? Feel free to click on any of these that you're experiencing with this particular vendor. I'll give you a couple minutes more here to see if any of you are experiencing. This one's going to be interesting, I can tell right now. I'll give you another 10 seconds if there's anyone there who hasn't participated in this poll. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share the results. Very interesting here. Less issues around the vendors and more around the product, which we see quite often, slower product updates and meandering roadmaps. Those are signs that don't necessarily have to be fatal, but are clearly warning signs. They are symptoms of a technology that's quite possibly has kind of run its course, or a kind of a strategic drift within the particular vendor itself. Now, if it's the latter, if it's meandering roadmaps, this is actually addressable. It may not always be addressable in your favor, but clearly, we've seen this before where companies have really tightened up their product management and really focused where they want to go, and decided what who their key customers and use cases were, and kind of addressed this meandering and really sort of straightened out those loops. So that one, is definitely recoverable. The slower product updates is an issue, maybe that it's undercapitalized or that there's just so much technical debt in the platform that it's just too difficult to innovate off of. So this is very interesting, quite different results from the last one. Okay. So those were the 10, and what I'm going to ask you to do just in your own mind, we won't do this as a survey, although I guess we could, which was, of these 10, which were showing up on the screen down the upper right here, how many did you check off? Now, if you've only checked 1 or 2, I would say obviously remain vigilant, don't panic. The only exception might be if they were the first 2, like a significant fall off in new customers and declining or no community, that those 2 together would be very serious. But in general, if you've just seen a couple of these, remain vigilant, don't panic. Likewise, if it's 3 to 5, you don't necessarily have to do something today, but you probably want to create a solid plan B. So that means having a backup in the event that if something is going to happen, that this tool is acquired, or there's some, it's clear that it's going to have some sort of future, perhaps be sunset, then you want to have a plan in place where you can put in some sort of selection or an acquisition process where you can find replacement technology. Now, if you ended up clicking the majority of these, in other words, 6 or more out of these, then that's a significant problem at that particular vendor with that particular technology. And so here's where we say, locate your nearest exit. And so that means you probably need to start a replacement process now so that you're actually staying on top of this rather than having events get on top of you. And so you probably want to, check in with us about what are your options in terms of alternative vendors and really get that underway, because depending on the type of technology, that can be, a 3 to 9 month process to go through a selection, then to do a migration and all that other stuff. So the other thing I'll remind you, as Scott mentioned, if you had any questions at all or any comments, anything you agreed with or disagreed with, feel free to use the questions tab in your GoToWebinar control panel. But before you take any, these are really talking about next steps here, but before you take any next steps, you do have to ask yourself one question, which is, maybe we're part of the problem, right? So we've been talking about the health of the vendor here and the health of your relationship and the health of the technology, but it could be that, we've looked at the problem and at least part of it is us. And so I would encourage you to definitely take a look at your own operation, your own capacity, your own effectiveness, and ask yourself, where are there areas that are under our control that we can improve to be getting more value out of this technology? And as Scott mentioned, you can do this in any number of different ways. You can go online to realstorygroup.com/realscore. You and your colleagues can just go do a quick kind of self-assessment test to then see, how are we actually doing? So here's an example sort of output. This was in the context of digital marketing, and you can see that you can, score yourself against these different dimensions. Each one has a series of subdimensions underneath them: expertise, scope, process, systems. And we'll show you the cross-industry average. If you're a subscriber, you'll see your benchmark for your particular industry, and then your raw score. So in this case, we have an enterprise that's doing relatively okay with respect to systems, but their processes and their expertise are substandard. So those are key areas that they need to work on. So, of course, if you need to replace your incumbent vendor, we hope you think of us as one of the first places to stop. This is what we do, is help people make this transition and go on this journey from where they're at to where they need to be. And we're certainly happy to help you in that regard. So I'll just show you some handy links here of just some things that you might want to check out and some free resources on our site. So while we're taking a look at the questions here, Scott can talk to you about next steps.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tony. And we certainly, again, just to reiterate, encourage you to take a look at the RealScore application in particular on our website. You can try it for yourself. And if you'd like to see sort of the extra goodies, so to speak, that are included with the subscription, just drop us a line at explore@realstorygroup.com, and we'd be happy to walk you through a behind-the-scenes tour of the Real Story Group subscriber experience and discuss the different options that are available. Also want to remind you that our next webinar will be next week. It'll be on Thursday, the 11th at 12 Eastern. We'll be discussing when you should or shouldn't use enterprise portal technology, which is obviously one of the 7 markets that we cover as part of our research, and we'd be happy to have you join us for that presentation as well. Also, we encourage you to go on our site, download samples from our research. We recently updated our social collaboration technology research and added Facebook Workplace as part of that research. So we certainly invite you to take a look at our research in that area as well as the other markets that we cover. Tony, any questions from the audience?
Yeah. So a great question from Isabel. She mentioned escape to open source, and she's asking, is escape to the cloud another alternative? In particular, I'm thinking about Microsoft, and Isabel, it's a great answer. I mean, we think about, what's been happening. I mean, Microsoft has clearly successfully moved several of their tools to the cloud. I think certainly Exchange and Outlook being among them, and now increasingly Dynamics. Nearly all the innovations happening in the cloud version of Dynamics, and interesting things happening in the rest of Office 365. So when a vendor really commits to this transition, which makes all kind of sense, it's an opportunity for customers. It's clearly an opportunity for the vendor who feels like they can probably innovate more quickly in that environment. The issue is what happens to those customers who, for a variety of reasons, need to stay on premise. And so that, of course, brings up SharePoint. And there are many reasons why an enterprise may need to stay on premise with respect to SharePoint, or they may have, even at Microsoft's bidding, at Microsoft's encouragement, made a number of extensions and customizations to SharePoint that they can't migrate into the cloud. So they're kind of stuck, in a sense, sort of forked in that environment. And now they're with the, kind of underloved second sibling, younger sibling, as Microsoft really pays its closest attention to the cloud-based version. So moving to the cloud is generally a sign of health with a vendor. I think one of the things that you have to then understand is that typically the non-cloud-based or on-premise or more traditional tool sets then are likely to be neglected, despite whatever the vendor is going to say that they're not. But in reality, we've seen that typically that the on-prem version kind of drives by the wayside very quickly. Catherine's asking, are there questions you'd recommend to ask vendors directly to assess how they're doing, or just pointless as they're not likely to be truthful? Well, they're selling you. So, and even if you're if it's an existing relationship, it can work this way. In the RFP templates that we offer to our subscribers, we've got a lot of questions to ask vendors in this regard. I think one of the things to do is to really focus on, just start your line of inquiry, Catherine, with the whole community thing, which is to really understand where are the closest meetings, when are they happening, how big are they, who's organizing them, where can I talk to my peers? And then you can get a lot of really good information from your peers about that particular vendor. If you're a Real Story Group subscriber, of course, you can always arrange a phone call with us. We can tell you what we're hearing out there in the marketplace and what we're seeing. In terms of actually asking the vendor, clearly you can use your cross-examination skills to continue to get more information. I think it's more around actually testing them out, testing them, testing their support, testing the quality of their ecosystem, really measuring what are we getting from one update to the next, and then reaching your own conclusions based on that. So good. Well, with that, we're running out of time. We're at 12:30. I really appreciate everyone joining in with us today. And for Real Story Group, this is Tony Byrne, thanking you for participating and looking forward to seeing you again. Bye now.